Well, Poppy, there are some of these events you go to, these Trump events, where we've seen escalating violence that feel like a tinderbox almost. This was not one of those. We saw sporadic protests. For the most part, they were peaceful. There was one woman with the Bernie sign, but she was peaceful. There was one small event that erupted into people throwing punches, both a Trump supporter and a protester on both sides. But everything was wrapped up pretty quickly, and people were escorted out. So these were not kind of the major protests that we've seen at some other events. For the most part, it was Trump up on that stage hammering John Kasich and trying to win this Ohio primary, Poppy.
And you know, it's interesting, Sarah, just your thoughts on what Bernie Sanders just did, coming out with this statement and saying, look, this wasn't us whatsoever. I know there's some back and forth about a tweet that was sent on behalf of the Trump camp pointing to a Bernie Sanders person. Did we get to the bottom of all of this?
Well, Donald Trump on this stage was saying it's Bernie Sanders supporters who are causing the problems, who are showing up at his events, who are protesting. You know, I think the reality is when you go to these events, it's a wide number of groups and even individuals who show up. Sometimes are Bernie Sanders supporters. Outside earlier was Black Lives Matter supporters. So it's a whole set of different people. And I think it just tells you, you know, Donald Trump has been good in bringing energy to the Republican Party. We certainly saw that here. This was a very energetic crowd. But there are people beyond Republican primary voters who have been very offended by his language, and some of those people are Bernie Sanders supporters, some of those are not.
Yeah, and Trump even saying in the tweet today that this all has, quote, totally energized America. All right, Sarah, stay with me. Martin Savage, to you, outside of the event, any skirmishes or clashes? And I'm just wondering what people are saying, reacting to what we've seen happen in Chicago, especially last night.
Well, those who support Donald Trump believe that all of that was orchestrated as a protest against him. In other words, they believe that this was really a setup. I'll tell you what's happening right now. We're in sort of a friction period. What you have is those who were there inside the rally for Donald Trump now coming out, and they run smack dab into a small but boisterous group of protesters. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's been no pushing, no shoving like that. It's not physical, but it is extremely verbal. One group starts chanting something anti-Trump, and then usually the counter is USA. So it goes back and forth, and it continues. We'll monitor that. Also, I should point out that we were standing by the door where all of those who protested inside come out. And it was almost like a parade. It was just you'd see groups of maybe 5 or 10 people being escorted out. I asked them, how were they dealt with? Most folks said that actually they were treated pretty well. There was a lot of shouting, but the authorities gently guided them to the door and said, there's the exit, now use it. So for the most part here, it is peaceful, but we'll monitor this in the background. Poppy.
I'm glad to hear it's been peaceful. Stay with me, Marty. Jeff, to you. You know, I think far too often, Jeff, we often just hear from sort of the pundits and the media, and everyone weighs in after these events happen, like what took place, which was pretty stunning last night in Chicago. I mean, you spoke with some of the protesters themselves. What did they tell you?
Poppy, it was interesting to actually walk with some of these protesters, and we were outside of the rally. Some of these pictures that you're seeing inside the rally, yes, there were some physical altercations, but outside the rally, I was struck by the number of families who were marching, mothers and fathers with their young children up on their parents' arms. They were really speaking out about what Donald Trump represents in terms of immigrants and other things. Things got a little heated and a little tense. But take a listen to this conversation I had with a man from the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. He's a Mexican-American immigrant who lives in Chicago. He left his house to join this protest, and this is why.
We were not going to let a bigot come into my neighborhood and disparage my people or my race or my ethnicity. And I felt that I needed to leave my home, come here, and say, ya basta, enough, quit the bullying. We stopped the bullying in Chicago, and this is historic because when you stop a bully once, you could then stop him again because guess what? People will lose fear. And Chicago showed how to deal with a bully.
So, Poppy, he says you stop a bully once, you stop a bully always. Chicago knows how to deal with that. But the issue here going forward is, this certainly energizes Donald Trump supporters, and it agitates this whole situation here. But we're seeing presidential candidates across the board here, Republicans and Democrats alike, calling on Donald Trump to have a leadership moment here and sort of send a directive to some of his, some of his own rhetoric here that has inflamed some of this himself. But Poppy, I think that this is just the beginning of this. If Donald Trump should become the Republican nominee, this race goes forward. We got a preview last night of what could be a tinderbox here in the next 7 or 8 months or so until the general election. It's perhaps an ugly side of American politics.
I mean, it seems like it already is, frankly, a tinderbox, Jeff. And you tweeted this image last night, if we could pull it up. Very powerful image last night. Talk to me about it.
I was struck just by the diversity of the crowd outside, Poppy. I mean, Donald Trump says that they were all organized thugs. That's not what I saw at all. You saw black and white, young and old, Hispanic and Latino, and this picture here of a young white man holding up a sign, "This isn't us." I mean, Chicago is, of course, a liberal city like most big cities in America here, but it really felt on the streets of Chicago last night, you could feel that they were embracing this moment to say no to Donald Trump and some of his immigrant rhetoric here. So I was just struck by the diverse tapestry, at least outside of this rally, that really Chicago is. I've covered Chicago for a long time, lived in Chicago, a very diverse city, of course, has problems of its own with that some of diversity, but last night it felt like a different moment to me. Of course, this is all leading up to the Illinois primary, one of those 5 states that are voting on Tuesday. Illinois is among them, and Donald Trump, of course, was trying to get their support, but he was stopped from coming to a rally in urban Chicago.
Yeah.
Poppy.
And Sarah, to you, just because you've spent so much time with the Trump campaign, to Jeff's point about sort of some in both parties calling on this to be a leadership moment for Donald Trump, he tweeted today, "The organized group of people, many of them thugs who shut down our First Amendment rights in Chicago, have totally energized America." That was his statement. They've energized this country. Can you walk us through sort of the thinking behind the Trump camp on a statement like that, rather than sort of a very clear-cut statement denouncing the violence?
Well, Poppy, I think what we've seen is that Donald Trump has said that he doesn't want to see violence, but then he comes to events like this and says, get the protesters out of there. And today on the stage, he said, it's not my people who are violent, it's these people who are coming in. So we've seen him kind of try to walk the line and disavow specific incidents of violence without taking any real responsibility for it. And I'm sure you can hear his supporters chanting behind me right now. The reality is that Donald Trump does have a very energized following. And as I was talking to people before the event started, a couple of them told me they were a little bit nervous about coming today. They were concerned after seeing the security situation in Chicago, but they wanted to turn up because they felt like they wanted to express their own First Amendment rights. They wanted to show up and support Donald Trump. So I think that's probably a little bit of what they were trying to get to in that statement, Poppy.
And Martin Savage, to you outside there, I mean, you see the diversity of the crowds coming inside. Some have pointed to this being cut down racial lines, right? Especially what we saw play out last night in Chicago. I just wonder what people are telling you of different races outside there. Because when it comes to winning, obviously, any candidate needs the minority vote right now as well. And Donald Trump says over and over again, I have the support of Latinos. I have the support of African Americans. Does it seem cut to you down racial lines right now?
Well, I mean, if you look at the audience that showed up today, it's predominantly white, and it predominantly appears to be either middle or upper, as far as the wealth scale, I guess you could say. You don't see a lot of minorities, you don't see Hispanics, and you don't see other representations of other groups. So it is pretty much cut along race lines. However, now that I say that, the protesters that are out here are very diverse. So it's really hard to just gauge and say by looking at an audience whether this represents the true constituency of Donald Trump. But one thing you can tell is they're pretty boisterous.
I wonder, Marty, I know it's hard to hear, but there is someone standing to your right behind you with a sign that says, "Vote, don't hate." If you could turn around, I don't know if she'd be willing to speak with us live, but if you could just ask her, she's, just a little bit more of that message.
We actually were talking earlier, and fellow Clevelanders here, and let me get your name first.
Susan.
Susan, why are you here? And of course, you're here amidst a backdrop of very different people than yourself, both in appearance and in what you believe, correct?
Yes. Well, I think we all want the same thing for our country. We want America to be a safe, happy, loving, and prosperous place. And I wanted to come to show Trump supporters that although I may not look like them, that we want the same things and we don't want hate. We want organized, peaceful elections, organized, peaceful protests. We want the same thing. Donald Trump is like the Nene Leach of politics. He's like I don't know. He's
just a reference to the Housewives of Atlanta there, in case anybody doesn't know. I should point out, Poppy, you actually were talking about you were fearful being here.
Yes, and when I've been involved in politics all my life and been to many rallies and was recently at the Black Lives Matter rally. And for the first time ever, when we were driving up into the IX Center, it was, I was scared. And my son actually didn't want me to come because he was scared also. But I felt like I had to, just to show people that although I don't look like them, although we may not look like each other, we can still respect each other and have a respectful dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And welcome back. We love you.
Yes, Poppy, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And Marty, I'd also like to hear from one of the other folks behind you who is sort of on the opposite side of all of this.
Sure. Okay. Let me see what I can do. How about a young man? Obviously, now you represent and will vote for or have voted for Donald Trump?
Supporting Donald Trump, yes.
Okay. So we were just talking about people's attitudes of hatred, whether that is reflective. There has been a lot of criticism.
I can't hear you.
There's been a lot of criticism of Donald Trump
Yes.
and his supporters of being very much against people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, races, not inclusive. What do you say to that?
I think he's trying to just make America great again by bringing everyone
But that's a good catchphrase. What
by
are your
bringing
feelings?
everyone together, because right now we're so divided in America, and I believe he can really bring us together unlike Barack Obama's done.
How does he do that with the language and the words that have been expressed by him?
I don't think his language has the problem. It's just people are too offended in some ways by what he says, but he just wants to get stuff done in America.
And what of the violence last night?
What was that?
What of the violence last night?
Well, as you saw, a lot of them were Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton supporters. So it's not, they said it was all his supporters that were starting the violence and everything, but they were bringing it to him, and they were just supporting Trump and defending him.
Thank you. Thank you, young man. So there you get just two opinions in a very large crowd.
It's just so important to hear those voices, Marty, and you see the division certainly right there. But glad everyone is out making their own voices heard. Appreciate it. Martin Savage, Sarah Murray, Jeff Zeleny, thank you all. A lot ahead. First of all, I want to